human being with a conscience. And when I see murder, I cannot stand by. And I have to call the murdered, and I have to call the murderers, the murderers.
Filmmaker Quentin Tarantino last month calling police officers murderers during an anti-police rally. Those comments sparking outrage among officers, leading several police unions to call for a boycott of Tarantino's films. Meantime, in Washington, President Obama and FBI Director James Comey seem to be at odds over the so-called Ferguson effect, which Comey says is an anti-police sentiment that's fueling a spike in crime. The argument between the president and the FBI director comes just as Congress considers more legislation on sentencing reform. So what does all this mean for the police and for criminal justice and the process moving forward? For more on this, we welcome Bernard Kerik, the former New York Police Commissioner and author of the book From Jailer to Jailed. Once again, Bernie, we thank you for your time on Newsmax Prime. First of all,
thanks, JD.
Do you agree with what Director Comey has had to say about the Ferguson effect?
You know what, I do. I've talked about this in the past, but I think there's something that the press and media has not picked up on, and that is, you know, there are critics out there that say that the director of the FBI doesn't have evidence, statistical evidence to prove his case or what he said. The reality is you're not going to have statistical evidence. Unless you go around and you interview various police departments and various police officers, you're not going to have statistical evidence. The reality is cops in this country today feel like there's a war against them. They feel like they're not being supported by their governors, by their mayors, by their city administrators. And in doing so, in having that feeling, you know, I don't think they're going to put themselves on the line. Listen, they're going to respond to 911 calls. They're going to respond to calls for help. But what they're not going to do is go out there aggressively policing, looking for bad guys, looking for guns, and jeopardizing their career. Because as we've seen, as they've done this in the past, they are second guessed at every turn, and many of them are being crucified by the press and media and then their critics if they do something that someone questions. So I think the FBI director has a good point, and I don't think there's any way statistically that you're going to prove it. All you have to do is look at the scenarios out in the street today and the spikes in crime, and I think you'll see the end result.
All right, let's move from the Ferguson effect to what we'll call the boycott effect, with police unions saying they're going to boycott Quentin Tarantino films. Now we understand that he intends to apologize for what he had to say. Is it too late for an apology? Has the damage really already been done?
You know what? I think he should apologize, regardless of whether it's too late or not. I think he should apologize. I think what he said was wrong. You know, he is a prime example of a lot of these guys in Hollywood that turn critical of the police, yet they're the same people that go out there and replicate what the cops do on a daily basis, the heroism, the courageousness, all the stuff that cops do. These guys replicate in Hollywood, and yet they're sometimes some of the first to turn on the cops, which I find kind of hypocritical. But I think he owes the police an apology, and it's going to be up to the unions whether they accept it or not.
Let me ask you about sentencing reform. Congress is working on it. President Obama moved this weekend with the executive branch of the release of what? Some 6,000, quote, nonviolent prisoners incarcerated federally for drug crimes. Now, there's some real concern I've been hearing and reading on the internet that this president may use the early release as a fig leaf for allowing incarcerated illegals to be released from jail. Your take on the release overall and the possibility of this being a presidential fig leaf?
You know what, JD, I think the presidential critics, I think they jumped the gun here. The reality is this was a change in the sentencing laws by the Sentencing Commission, which was actually enacted over a year ago. If Congress wanted to stop this in any way or prevent this from happening, they could have done that. The reality is this was done a long time ago, and these changes in the sentencing laws are just coming to fruition now. Therefore, you're going to have this release. But I think there's a much bigger issue, and the bigger issue is You have to look at the overall criminal justice system. The time that we're sentencing these men and women, what happens to them when they're in prison, what's going to happen to them when they get out of prison. Prison is an institutional learning center for thuggery and criminality, and we're taking first-time nonviolent offenders, we're turning them into thugs, and then we're sending them home. I think it's time to look at the overall system, and I think that's what the bipartisan members of the House and Senate have been doing for the last year and a half since I've been talking about this.
Bernie Kerik, as always, we thank you for your time on Newsmax Prime. The name of Bernie's book, once again, is From Jailer to Jailed. Now, don't go away, because when we come back, John Gizzi and I take time to remember former Tennessee Senator Fred Thompson. That's next.